25 years ago, a 39-year-old woman left her East Side apartment, drove her silver Honda around Lake Erie and vanished without a trace, leaving her family shattered in despair. Authorities once suspected a male colleague with whom she had a strained relationship, but with no body found, no clear evidence, and the investigation quickly hitting a dead end. Yet through all those years, the victim's younger brother never gave up hope, clinging to the slim chance that his sister might still be found. Then one day, in what seemed like an ordinary event, a detail overlooked for 2 decades resurfaced, opening a new lid that stunned the entire community. Before we get into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you find this video compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. On the evening of October 14, 2000, Detroit's East Side was steeped in the chill of early autumn. Its streets stretching under the faint glow of yellow streetlights reflected on wet pavement from an afternoon rain. In a small third-floor apartment in an old brick building, Elena Rodriguez, 39, sat quietly after a late dinner with her younger brother. She was a dedicated accountant, single, and had long struggled with diabetes and bouts of depression that only her closest family could truly understand. Marcus, her brother, was used to her occasional silences. But that night, as Elena set her dishes down, her eyes carried a distant look. She softly said she wanted to drive to Lake Erie to get some air to calm her mind. The words sounded like reassurance, but they held something unsettling that Marcus couldn't quite articulate. About an hour later, Elena put on a dark green coat, grabbed a small purse, and stepped outside. Her 1999 silver Honda Accord started with a low rumble and rolled down the dark street. A downstairs neighbor later recalled catching a glimpse of Elena through the stairwell window. Her face calm, her pace hurried, but not unusual. That was the last time anyone saw Elena alive. The night passed in silence. Then the entire next day with no ring from her phone, no calls, no texts, and no messages left behind. The silver Honda didn't return to the parking lot below her building. By the following evening, when all traces had vanished, fear surged and Marcus and the family frantically reported her missing to the Detroit police. A missing persons case was opened that night, October 15, 2000, and patrol units immediately began scouring routes leading to Lake Erie, where Elena had said she'd drive. Police cars sped through the drizzle, their red and blue lights sweeping across wet streets, but they found nothing but endless darkness. The next morning, the search expanded to the Rouge River and its tributaries running through the city's east side, as well as sections of I-75 and I-94 highways. But the water remained still with no tire marks, no shattered glass. While police busied themselves with maps and helicopters scanning from above, Marcus and friends began printing hundreds of flyers with Elena's portrait, short brown hair, a gentle smile. The flyers were posted across East Side from corner stores and laundromats to lampposts and bus stops. Below the bold missing headline was the family's phone number and a plea. If anyone sees Elena or her silver Honda, please report immediately. Neighbors formed volunteer search groups, knocking on doors and questioning street vendors. An elderly fruit seller at a market said she might have seen a woman resembling Elena passed by late that night, but she wasn't certain. The Detroit Free Press ran a story with the headline, "Local Accountant Vanishes Mysteriously While Radio Stations Broadcast Marcus's Plea, His Voice Breaking. If anyone has seen my sister, please contact us. We just want to bring her home." The news spread, sparking a wave of community concern. Even strangers volunteered, armed with flashlights and maps, to join searches around Lake Erie. Notably, when a K-9 unit was deployed to Belle Isle Harbor, the dogs strained at their leashes, barking furiously at the edge of a wooden dock where small boats were moored. Divers checked below, but found only trash and seaweed. The dog's signal ended there, leaving behind lingering unease. The initial search days closed with restlessness and tension, and Detroit police shifted to a formal investigation. They summoned Elena's friends and colleagues to the station for statements, reviewing her past and present relationships. Many colleagues described Elena as diligent and dedicated to her accounting work, but recently showing signs of exhaustion, occasionally absent without clear reason. A close friend recalled that weeks before her disappearance, during a late coffee meetup, Elena had sighed and half-jokingly said she just wanted to drive straight into the river and be done with it. Though the comment was fleeting, in the interrogation room, it raised the possibility of suicide. However, That theory wasn't convincing enough as her family insisted Elena wasn't the type to abandon everything. Marcus told police, "My sister was sick, yes, but she had so much holding her here, especially family. She'd never leave us behind." Alongside the suicide theory, police considered the possibility that Elena was a victim of a random crime. Detroit in the early 2000s still saw frequent robberies and assaults on its streets, especially in East Side and along I-75. A woman driving alone at night could have been a target. They theorized someone might have stopped her, attacked, and disposed of the silver Honda somewhere. Yet, no security cameras around her apartment or the harbor captured any incident. A third theory emerged. Elena left voluntarily. Her signs of depression coupled with work stress might have driven her to abandon her old life for a fresh start elsewhere. Some colleagues even speculated she might have left with a new romantic partner. But this theory faced fierce opposition from her family. Marcus shook his head at a press conference. If she wanted to leave, she'd at least leave a note. Elena would never vanish without a word to anyone. Amid these hanging theories, a technical detail complicated the investigation. Checking Elena's cell phone records, technicians found that on the night she vanished, before her phone went dead, she received 2 final calls from an unidentified number minutes apart. No recordings, no texts, just raw data. Incoming call, anonymous number. This sparked a flurry of new questions. Who called? Why contact her that night? And if Elena answered, what was said on the other end? These fragments only strengthened the family's belief that death wasn't her choice. Elena had plans to attend a friend's birthday that weekend, left work unfinished at the office, and had untouched savings in the bank. None of it suggested someone planning to walk away. For Marcus, one truth was certain. Something happened that night, and it wasn't her choice. But as police weighed the 3 theories, they found no evidence to confirm any. Suicide left no traces. A random crime had no witnesses, and voluntary departure showed no preparation. All that remained was the silence of a dead phone and 2 mysterious calls, like faint signals from a nightmare pulling the Rodriguez family into a spiral of unrelenting doubt. The suspicion surrounding the final 2 calls on Elena's phone forced Detroit police to deepen their investigation with greater precision. They started at the most familiar place, her 3rd-floor apartment. One late October morning, 2 detectives and a forensic technician entered Elena's home, where the air still held the unfinished feel of someone who had just stepped out. The bed was neatly made, the desk cluttered with accounting papers, the fridge stocked with food bought earlier that week. They searched every drawer, checked her personal computer, and reviewed bank statements. There were no signs of large withdrawals, no travel tickets, no passport, no notes hinting at plans to leave the city. Everything suggested Elena hadn't prepared to flee or start anew elsewhere. The police then moved to interviews. Among the friends, family, and colleagues called to the station, many confirmed that while Elena was often somber, she never spoke of abandoning everything. Close colleagues at the accounting firm noted she had recently been avoiding a male co-worker Vincent Torres from the finance department. A female colleague recalled that months earlier Elena had filed a harassment complaint against Vincent for verbal and text-based misconduct, but it was dismissed by management due to lack of evidence and witnesses. This drew police attention, especially since Elena's phone records showed calls from Vincent's number in the days before her disappearance. Vincent Torres was brought in for questioning. A man in his mid-40s, neatly built, with a pale face and weary eyes, he answered tersely when asked about October 14th. "I was home alone watching TV. Didn't go anywhere." His response immediately raised suspicion as he had no alibi. A detective pressed, "Can you tell us what you watched or if anyone called or a neighbor saw you at home?" Vincent hesitated, then said, "Don't remember. Probably a football game, and I turned off my phone early to sleep." His vague answers only thickened the case file. When police cross-checked Elena's phone records, they found that on the night she vanished, aside from the 2 anonymous calls, there was a missed call from Vincent Torres' number. Confronted, Vincent admitted to calling, but claimed it was to ask about a cost reconciliation sheet at work because I forgot to finish it. The excuse sounded forced, especially since colleagues confirmed no urgent work was pending the next day. Still, the law didn't allow a conviction based solely on one call. Police also questioned Elena's close friends. A college friend said Elena had mentioned feeling followed when returning home late, but never named anyone. Neighbors recalled seeing Elena leave that night in her green coat carrying a small purse as Marcus described, but saw no one with her. No one heard arguments or witnessed her meeting any man nearby. Police searched Vincent's apartment again. They found no unusual traces, no blood, no suspicious items. His car showed no signs of a rushed cleaning. Everything seemed too clean, suspiciously so. An internal investigation note read, "Possible suspect prepared a story. Acted cautiously. Cannot rule out knowledge of covering tracks." However, the biggest limitation in 2000 was rudimentary forensic technology. Fibers and biological samples from Elena's apartment weren't sufficient for origin analysis. Fingerprints in her car remained a mystery since the silver Honda hadn't been found. All indirect evidence pointed to Vincent hiding something, but it couldn't form grounds for a charge. The lead investigator later said, "We had one puzzle piece, but it didn't fit anywhere in the picture. You can't build a whole crime from one call in a shaky statement." Thus, the case listed Vincent Torres as a person of interest, but couldn't elevate him to a formal suspect. When Marcus learned Vincent was released after questioning, he was furious. He pounded the table, demanding he was the last to call my sister. "Why didn't you keep him?" Police could only shake their heads, citing procedure. "We need evidence, not hunches." But deep down, the Rodriguez family believed the mysterious thread between those final calls and Vincent's vague statements held the key to the truth. The questioning of Vincent Torres ended in frustration, and from there, Elena Rodriguez's missing persons case began to slide into the shadows of a dead end. The absence of the silver Honda Accord was the crux that kept the entire case shrouded in fog. Without the car, police couldn't trace Elena's route, check for collision marks, or pinpoint where she might have stopped. Searches around Lake Erie and the Rouge River yielded nothing. The cold water swallowing all traces. No new witnesses came forward. Neighbors who gave initial statements only repeated the same detail. Elena left her apartment in a green coat carrying a small purse. Then her figure vanished. Major roads, harbors, and night markets were combed, but no one recalled seeing a woman matching her description on October 14th. In 2000, DNA testing technology was still limited, lacking the sensitivity to analyze faint biological samples from Elena's apartment. Hairs, fibers, and smudges on the floor were sealed, but lab scientists shook their heads, not enough data to identify. This meant the case stalled, unable to move forward. Meanwhile, the Rodriguez family clung to anything to avoid collapsing. Marcus suggested holding a prayer vigil by Lake Erie where his sister said she'd go to get some air. They invited friends, neighbors, and even strangers who empathized. A small circle formed on the windy beach, candles lit, their flickering light reflected in the dark lake. Elena's mother sat silently, clutching her daughter's photo, her eyes red, but no longer able to shed tears. From then on, the family held similar vigils each year, lighting candles and reciting prayers for Elena's return, a ritual to sustain hope and resist forgetting. But Detroit never stood still. Weeks after Elena vanished, new cases emerged. Another woman attacked on a highway. A student missing from a dorm. News of Elena was overshadowed. Her flyers across East Side faded under rain and sun, replaced by ads and new notices. The community, once buzzing with searches, lost interest. To many, it was just another missing person case in a city accustomed to tragedy. In police briefings, Elena's name was still noted, Vincent Torres remained a person of interest, but no one truly believed a breakthrough was near. A young detective whispered to a colleague, "Maybe she's gone forever like so many others." That indifference cut like a knife into the Rodriguez family's hearts, but they had no choice but to wait for a miracle or a stray piece of evidence to emerge from the darkness. By early 2002, after nearly 2 years of fruitless searching, the Detroit Police Department made the painful decision to close Elena Rodriguez's missing persons case and officially classify it as a cold case. A curt notice sent to the family read, "No new evidence or witnesses. The case is archived pending breakthrough information." For investigators, this was routine when prioritizing new cases, but for the Rodriguez family, it was a second sentence after Elena's disappearance, a sentence of oblivion. Elena's mother, Carmen, lived in constant anxiety since her daughter vanished. She hung Elena's photo in the living room, kept her last worn coat in the closet like an unmoving relic. Each year at the Lake Erie Vigil, she attended, candle in hand, eyes fixed on the water as if expecting Elena to step ashore. But that fragile hope eroded, replaced by deep depression. In 2008, Carmen passed away quietly, carrying an unresolved pain after 8 years of waiting. She died without ever knowing what truly happened to her daughter. The only one who didn't give up was Marcus. After his mother's funeral, he became almost obsessed with seeking justice for his sister. Old case files, yellowed news clippings, and scribbled witness notes were kept in a wooden box in his living room. Marcus repeatedly petitioned police to reopen the case, highlighting inconsistencies in Vincent Torres's statements and requesting reanalysis of biological samples with new technology. Each time he received the same reply: insufficient grounds to restart. But Marcus didn't stop. He wrote to local politicians, contacted true crime TV shows, and tirelessly kept Elena's story alive through small articles and fleeting news mentions. While her case gathered dust in police archives, Marcus continued lighting candles each year by Lake Erie, a reminder that this case wasn't over. After Elena's case was officially closed and archived in 2002, time rolled on coldly for 2 decades from 2000 to 2020 with no sign of progress. Metal cabinets in the Detroit Police Department's basement held her thick case file untouched except by Marcus, the only brother who never let go. He kept everything left of his sister. Yellowed Detroit Free Press clippings, tattered flyers once plastered across East Side, and hasty witness notes he'd begged police to record. All were bound in folders stored in a heavy wooden box as if it were the beating heart of a case everyone else had buried. In the small apartment he shared with his wife and kids, the living room always had a corner dedicated to that box. Each night after the family slept, Marcus would pull it out, rereading lines he knew by heart. Elena left her apartment, green coat, small purse. Vincent Torres claimed he was home alone. Some nights he lingered on the phone log with the 2 anonymous calls, wondering what was said on the other end and why that secret remained buried. The community moved on. The early prayer vigils by Lake Erie once drew dozens, but their numbers dwindled. 5 years later, only a few close friends and elderly neighbors remained. 10 years later, many forgot Elena's name. Detroit, rife with disappearances and new cases weekly, saw Elena fade into a long list of unsolved cases. Her old flyers were replaced by service ads and concert flyers. Only Marcus remembered every detail, every time stamp. Over those 20 years, he repeatedly petitioned to reopen the case. In 2010, as DNA technology advanced, he wrote to the state lab requesting reanalysis of samples from Elena's apartment. The response was cold. Insufficient sample quantity, no usable value. In 2015, he pitched Elena's story to a true crime TV show, but it was rejected for lacking audience appeal. Marcus returned home, clutching his wooden box, still waiting. At times he considered letting go, especially when his wife and kids needed him in the present. But each glance at Elena's photo on the wall, her gentle smile, warm eyes, refused him permission to forget. In a 2018 interview with a local paper, Marcus said a line that choked readers. "I'm just afraid I'll die before knowing the truth about my sister." It wasn't just a brother's obsession, but an echo of 2 decades of silence, where justice seemed to have abandoned the Rodriguez family. Meanwhile, Vincent Torres lived calmly as a model citizen. He continued his finance job, attended church, and appeared in local community photos. To many, he was a polite, middle-aged man. No one suspected he'd once been questioned about Elena's disappearance. Each time Marcus saw Vincent's name in papers or event invitations, he clenched his fists but could do nothing but wait. 2 decades passed, the early hopes fading like a half-burned candle by Lake Erie. But in that darkness, Marcus kept a small flame alive, not bright, but persistent. That tenacity, that unyielding faith of a brother, kept the case tethered, waiting for the day a stray piece of evidence would rise from the past, breaking 2 decades of heavy silence. In March 2021, as Detroit's winter receded, a group of volunteer divers went into the Rouge River to clean trash from its depths. They were part of a local environmental program, often pulling out tires, cans, and discarded metal frames. The murky water, thick with mud and oil, held no promise of secrets. But when a diver swept his flashlight through the deep sediment, its beam caught a large object, making him pause. It wasn't a typical metal frame, but clearly the roof and door frame of a car, rusted to blend with the muddy riverbed. They marked the spot, tried pulling with ropes, and as the mud peeled away, a faded license plate emerged. The rusted numbers stunned the group. They matched the plate of Elena Rodriguez's silver Honda Accord, missing since 2000. The find was immediately reported to Detroit police. A special task force was dispatched, sealing off the area. Initial photos of the car, half buried in mud and water, were rushed to the case file room. The police department buzzed after 20 years of dormancy. An internal memo reached Marcus Rodriguez. "We found your sister's car." Reading those words, Marcus froze, his hands trembling so much he dropped his phone. For 2 decades, he dreamed of any trace to prove his sister existed that night. Now, the silver Honda had surfaced. Like a ghost rising from the past, police invited Marcus and a few family members to the site. Standing by the Rouge River, they saw Elena's car covered in mud and debris, its windows shattered, the silver paint now blotchy brown. It was both familiar and alien. Once the car his sister drove to work each morning, clean and shiny. Now it resembled a steel coffin hidden underwater for 2 decades. Marcus choked out, "Sis, we finally found you." Tension gripped the scene. Police cordoned off the area, preparing cranes and forensic teams to retrieve the car. News cameras appeared, local reporters crowding beyond the barriers. Word of the rusted Honda's discovery spread fast across Detroit. 20-year cold case, Elena Rodriguez's missing car, pulled from Rouge River. The public was stunned, and the family embraced in a mix of painful and relieving emotion. For Marcus, that moment was both a twisting knife and an opening door. He knew the car was not just evidence, but a message from the past, signaling that the truth was finally about to surface. The car, submerged in the Rouge River for 2 decades, was pulled up on a cold morning in late March 2021. The rescue team's crane lowered thick chains, hooking tightly to the rusted undercarriage. The sound of metal scraping echoed across the water, leaving everyone on the shore holding their breath. Slowly, the silver Honda Accord emerged from the black mud, dirty water pouring from shattered windows, carrying the acrid smell of rust and decayed seaweed. When the car was placed on a blue tarp, the air seemed to freeze. For Marcus and the family, it wasn't just a car. It was the remnant of a nightmare that began in 2000. The forensic team approached, clad in full protective gear, and began opening the car door. The rusted door, stuck tight, required a crowbar to pry open. In that moment, a sight silenced even the most seasoned officers. Inside, between the driver's and passenger seats were disintegrated skeletal remains encrusted with mud and algae. Nothing was intact except for tattered clothing fragments, a mud-caked brown leather wallet, a blackened keychain, and a silver wristwatch, now tarnished. Marcus instantly recognized the watch as Elena's, the birthday gift he gave her in 1998. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing as forensic officers carefully collected each bone fragment and item, sealing them in evidence bags. The wallet still held identifiable items, a faded ID card with Elena Rodriguez's name still legible, a few crumpled old bills, and a bank card expired in 2002. These small objects were like silent witnesses to a life abruptly cut short. The family's last flicker of hope that Elena might return vanished. Everything shattered the moment the car was opened. However, what caught the police's attention most was the forensic team's report of foreign biological evidence inside the car not belonging to Elena. A tiny piece of soft tissue lodged in a crevice of the back seat was carefully sampled, placed in a vial, and sealed. This could be the critical key they'd waited 20 years for evidence, potentially pointing directly to the killer. Hearing this, Marcus was both shaken and cautiously hopeful. Standing beside an officer, he asked, voice trembling, "Will this tell us who did it?" The officer nodded silently, his eyes conveying the gravity of the find. News of the remains and evidence found in the Honda spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Elena Rodriguez's remains found after 20 years missing." Detroit's community, which had largely forgotten, was stunned and new. Old neighbors were shocked, many leaving flowers outside Elena's former apartment. But for the Rodriguez family, the pain was beyond words. Marcus told reporters, "We've lived 20 years in waiting. Now we know she's gone, but we still don't know who took her life." In the evidence room, technicians labeled each item: wallet, keys, watch, bones. All were examined under microscopes, photographed, and documented. But it was the foreign biological sample that truly shook the investigation. It was sent straight to the state's DNA lab where modern technology could extract and decode even a single cell. Meanwhile, Marcus and the family were torn by conflicting emotions. There was pain as the harsh truth materialized. Elena was never coming back. There was a small relief in finally having an answer to where she is after 20 years of fog. But above all, there was a haunting emptiness. They still didn't know who did it or why. In the quiet night after leaving the scene, Marcus wrote in his journal, "Today I saw what's left of my sister in that rusted car. I wish I never had to see it. But if that's the price for justice to come closer, I'm willing to bear it." The silver Honda was no longer just evidence. It was Elena's second grave, a silent but persistent accusation, and it signaled a new chapter in the investigation. As the truth buried under the Rouge River's mud began to rise to the surface after the silver Honda, remains and evidence were retrieved from the Rouge River, the Detroit Police Department had no choice but to immediately reopen the investigation. A cold case task force was formed comprising seasoned detectives and young forensic experts versed in modern DNA technology. They were tasked with revisiting Elena Rodriguez's entire 2000 case file. This time determined not to let the case fade into oblivion again. In a third-floor meeting room at the station, thick case files were spread across the table. Interrogation transcripts, early forensic reports, phone logs, and even old missing person flyers kept as relics. Each yellowed page was turned, each statement read aloud and cross-referenced with current data. The detectives focused heavily on the initial 2000 interrogations when witnesses' memories were still fresh. From the start, one name stood out again: Vincent Torres. In his 2000 statement, he claimed he was home alone on October 14th, watching a football game and going to bed early. But when the cold case team checked broadcast schedules, they found no football game aired at the time he mentioned. The only program was a TV drama, completely contradicting his story. This small detail, once overlooked, now became a suspicious puzzle piece. Moreover, when comparing old phone records with archived telecom data, technicians found an anomaly. Besides the two anonymous calls, there was a call from Vincent to Elena that night. It lasted over 3 minutes, contrary to his earlier claim that he only called about work, but no one answered. This showed he lied, at least partially, about his final contact with Elena. The cold case team also reviewed a female colleague's statement who witnessed Vincent repeatedly making Elena uncomfortable at work. In 2000, her testimony was deemed insufficiently compelling due to lack of evidence. But rereading it now, detectives noted its consistency. Vincent often followed Elena during lunch breaks, using work questions as an excuse to get close. This testimony paired with the foreign biological evidence in the car became a critical piece of the puzzle. Another discrepancy in 2000, Vincent said he turned off his phone early and went to bed by 1000 p.m., but phone logs showed his device was active until nearly midnight with at least 2 unsuccessful outgoing calls. This clear contradiction proved Vincent was hiding something, possibly tied directly to Elena's death. The investigation team's atmosphere heated up. A young detective said, "Back then, we missed these details due to limited tech and new case pressures, but now they add up to a chain of anomalies we can't ignore." The team leader nodded, pointing to Vincent's 2000 photo. He's lived freely for 20 years. There's no hiding now. With old files unearthed and new evidence from the Honda, the cold case team knew they'd entered a new phase from vague despair to a picture with emerging clarity. And at its center, Vincent Torres loomed ever more like a haunting shadow awaiting exposure. While the cold case team tirelessly reviewed every 2000 detail, the Detroit Police Department's forensic lab entered its most critical phase, analyzing the biological sample from the rusted Honda. It was a tiny piece of tissue stuck in a backseat crevice, which in 2000 would have been dismissed as useless due to limited technology. But by 2021, forensic science had transformed. Technicians used next-generation DNA sequencing capable of extracting and replicating data from just a few cells preserved after decades underwater. The process took weeks, each step handled with utmost care. When the first results came in, the investigation room fell silent. The DNA sequence on the screen revealed a complete genetic profile. Technicians cross-checked it with the National CODIS database containing DNA from millions of investigated individuals. Within hours, the result was clear. The sample from the car matched Vincent Torres, now 62. It was the name the Rodriguez family had suspected for 2 decades, but never had proof to confirm. For the first time in 20 years, police had undeniable scientific evidence linking Vincent to the scene. No longer just vague statements or guesses about final calls. DNA doesn't lie. It confirmed Vincent was in the silver Honda the night Elena vanished, and he was likely the one who ensured she never returned. When this was presented to the task force, tension filled the room. A detective exclaimed, "20 years and we finally have the missing piece." Another clutched the case file tightly. "He can't escape now." They immediately called an urgent meeting with the district attorney, presenting the DNA results and contradictions in Vincent's old statements. The DA nodded. "This is the key evidence. We have grounds for an arrest." The news reached Marcus. When police confirmed the DNA was Vincent Torres's, he sat silently for a long moment, then broke down. 20 years of fighting, keeping every clipping and note had finally paid off. He told reporters afterward, "I don't know how to describe it. We've lived a lifetime in doubt. Now justice is finally speaking." The 2021 DNA results not only opened a path for a case thought forever lost, but showed the power of science in answering questions time seemed to have buried. For the first time since 2000, the Rodriguez family and Detroit's community had reason to believe the truth was nearing the light. And Vincent Torres, the man who evaded justice for 2 decades, now faced accountability. News of the DNA results spread like a cold wind through the community. Vincent Torres, once vaguely mentioned in early investigations before fading into obscurity, now re-emerged as a murder suspect. What shocked everyone was that for over 20 years, Vincent lived as a model citizen. He regularly attended local church services, volunteered as a charity treasurer, and appeared as a mild-mannered, tidy, middle-aged man. Neighbors described him as someone who always greeted you, helped elderly women with their cars, never suspecting a horrific secret behind his calm demeanor. When police announced the news, many reacted with disbelief. A church acquaintance told reporters, "Vincent handed out cookies to kids at Christmas. Helped us fundraise for a church roof repair. He never seemed dangerous, but gradually past pieces surfaced." Archived records showed Vincent had been accused multiple times of verbal and text-based harassment by colleagues. Elena Rodriguez was one who filed a complaint, but it was dismissed for lack of evidence. He'd also been internally reprimanded for inappropriate workplace behavior, though never convicted or tried. This deepened the community's shock. The man they thought was trustworthy had a long history of improper conduct. Never fully addressed now, with DNA placing him in Elena's Honda the night she vanished. The kind neighbor image collapsed entirely. Detroit headlines blared. Church-going man turns out to be suspect in woman's 20-year-old disappearance. The Rodriguez family, though long suspicious of Vincent, couldn't hide their astonishment. Marcus said, "I knew he was involved, but I never thought he could live so calmly for 2 decades like nothing happened. We endured the pain of loss while he lived freely, respected by the community. That's the cruelty of it." Neighbors, friends, and churchgoers who once trusted Vincent split into 2 camps. Some refused to accept the truth, insisting he was framed, or DNA could be mistaken. But most were stunned, feeling betrayed and angry for unwittingly shielding a killer for 20 years. Vincent Torres' name, once familiar at church events, now dominated evening news and front pages. The image of a 62-year-old man, gray-haired in a neat shirt, stepping out of his suburban home, surrounded by police, became a symbol of community shock. The seemingly good man revealed as a suspect in one of Detroit's coldest cases. In August 2021, after months of covert surveillance and finalizing legal documents, the Detroit Police Department executed Vincent Torres' arrest at his quiet suburban home where he lived with his wife and 2 grown children. That morning, The street, usually filled with birdsong and kids playing, shook with the sound of police cars arriving, their red and blue lights flashing. The arrest warrant was read loudly at the door, and within minutes Vincent, the neighbor seen as kind for years, was led out in handcuffs surrounded by armed officers. His confused look, pale face, and hands locked in cold steel cuffs were stark. The moment was captured fully by local reporters' cameras, appearing hours later on the Detroit Free Press's front page, 20-year cold case. Vincent Torres arrested in Elena Rodriguez case. The photo stunned the public. A gray-haired man, once a church regular, now bowed in disgrace between two officers in bulletproof vests. Neighbors spilled onto the street, many shaking their heads in disbelief. A woman next door exclaimed, "My God, he lived beside us for 20 years. I had him help park my car, let my kids play in his yard. How can you believe he killed someone and lived so calmly?" A man who played golf with Vincent on weekends hesitated. "I knew he was quiet, sometimes moody, but a killer. It's unimaginable." Police swiftly escorted Vincent to a patrol van. Some neighbors shouted after him, "Vince, is it true? Say something." But Vincent stayed silent, eyes fixed on the ground, making the air heavier. The news swept Detroit. Major TV channels aired special reports recounting the two-decade journey from Elena Rodriguez's disappearance to the Honda's recovery from the Rouge River and the DNA implicating Vincent. Legal experts commented, "This is one of the decade's most resonant cold cases, not just for its duration, but because the suspect lived among the community in a perfect disguise for 20 years. The Rodriguez family, watching the news on TV, wept. Marcus clenched his fists, whispering, "Finally, this day has come." But the pain didn't ease. The truth was too brutal. The man suspected from the start, who slipped through justice with lies, was only now brought to light. Vincent's arrest didn't just shock his neighborhood, but rattled the community's faith in security. People faced a terrifying truth. Sometimes the killer is the friendliest neighbor, trusted for years without suspicion. When Vincent Torres was officially arrested and splashed across major headlines, the Rodriguez family finally faced the truth that haunted them for 2 decades. At a brief police press conference, Marcus appeared, face gaunt, eyes shadowed from sleeplessness, but his gaze resolute. He held the microphone, voice breaking but firm. "I've waited 20 years for this day, but my mother isn't here to see justice served. That's the greatest pain of my life." The room fell silent, then filled with muffled sobs. Many understood that no justice could fully heal when a mother died without knowing her daughter's fate. The family's emotions were a conflicting tide. Pain came from confirming Elena was murdered by someone they knew from her life. But there was also partial release, as if a 20-year burden finally had an answer. No more endless waiting. No more unanswerable questions like where is she or who did it. Instead, the truth, though cruel, took clear shape. Marcus told the press, "I don't know whether to thank or curse fate. We've lost so much, but at least now we have answers. I just hope my mother somewhere can rest knowing justice has come." For him, the personal meaning wasn't in how harshly Vincent was punished, but in ensuring his sister's story wasn't buried in oblivion. After the arrest, the Rodriguez family gathered in their small East Side home. They lit a candle beside Elena's photo, silently holding hands. The air was thick with tears, but lighter than ever. For the first time in 20 years, they could whisper to each other, "We know the truth." And that, though it couldn't erase the loss, brought a flicker of light to those who'd lived too long in the darkness of pain and waiting. In May 2022, the Wayne County Criminal Court opened the most anticipated trial in over 2 decades. The prosecution of Vincent Torres, the sole suspect in Elena Rodriguez's disappearance and murder. From early morning, the courthouse was packed with news vans, reporters jostling for space, and hundreds of Detroiters lining up just to enter the courtroom or feel the atmosphere of a case that had become a collective obsession. Marcus and the family sat in the front row, eyes steadfast, carrying the weight of 20 years of waiting for justice. The prosecution was meticulously prepared. They presented the DNA evidence from the tissue sample in the rusted Honda, a perfect match to Vincent's genetic profile. They showed phone records proving Vincent called Elena on October 14, 2000, contradicting his old claim of no contact. They cited witness statements from colleagues who saw Vincent harass Elena at work, turning her workplace into a stifling space for the 39-year-old already burdened by illness and depression. Piece by piece, every small detail was assembled into a larger picture. Vincent Torres wasn't just a liar, but was at the scene on that fateful night. Vincent, now 63, appeared in a grey suit, his silver hair and weathered face stark. As the prosecutor pointed at him, calling him the man who ensured Elena Rodriguez never returned, Vincent only shook his head, lips pressed tight. He denied all charges. His defense attorney tried to sow doubt. The DNA sample could have been contaminated. After 2 decades underwater, the police in 2000 overlooked details and Vincent was merely coincidentally in the car, but didn't kill Elena. The lawyer also criticized the police for fixating on one suspect for 20 years while ignoring the possibility of a random criminal. But the argument quickly faltered when the prosecutor presented a scientific report affirming the DNA was analyzed with modern standards, leaving no room for error. They highlighted Vincent's lies about the TV program that night. His claim of not calling and going to bed by 10 p.m. all contradicted by actual records. An innocent person doesn't need to fabricate such details. The prosecutor concluded Detroit's community followed the trial daily. Newspapers covered it extensively. TV channels launched the Elena Rodriguez case segments with legal experts, psychologists, and people who knew Vincent. In coffee shops, on trains, and during office lunch breaks, Vincent and Elena's story became a hot topic. How could a man live calmly for 20 years among the community? Attend church, hand out cookies to kids while hiding a deadly secret. During the final arguments, the prosecutor stood before the jury, voice resounding. For 20 years, the Rodriguez family has lived in the shadow of doubt and pain. Now, science has illuminated the truth. DNA doesn't lie. Those calls didn't vanish on their own, and Elena Rodriguez, the woman who left her apartment one October night in 2000, deserves to have her final voice heard through justice. The defense lawyer fought to the end, emphasizing no direct witnesses and no video evidence. But everyone knew 2000 lacked the widespread cameras of today. What remained was science, and science pointed squarely at Vincent. As the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom air grew heavy. Marcus gripped his younger sister's hand, breathing as if he'd just run the longest race of his life. When the verdict was read, Vincent Torres guilty of first-degree murder, sobs erupted across the room. Marcus shed tears, a mix of pain for his sister's confirmed death and relief that justice was no longer a distant promise. The case closed, but its echoes lingered across Detroit. It was cited as clear proof that justice may come late, but never vanishes. It arrived through forensic science, advancements in DNA technology, and above all, the unrelenting persistence of a brother, Marcus Rodriguez, who kept the flame alive for 20 years against society's forgetting. In a post-trial interview, Marcus said, "What I've learned is never let a story be buried. If we stay silent, the truth dies. If we keep speaking, one day justice will come, no matter how late." His words became a powerful message spreading beyond the family, beyond Detroit, reminding all that sometimes one person's faith can change a case's fate. Elena Rodriguez's case ended with Vincent Torres' conviction, but its resonance endured. The truth never fades, only waits for time and persistence to be found. For the Rodriguez family, they finally had their answer. The story of Elena Rodriguez's case is not just about the tragedy of a woman's disappearance and discovery after 20 years. It also reflects many realities of American society today. First, it shows the power of modern science. The tiny DNA sample from the rusted Honda, useless in 2000, became undeniable evidence in 2021. This reminds us that technology, especially in forensics, can shift the scales of justice, and society must continue investing in science to ensure truth isn't buried forever. Second, Marcus's story, the brother who never gave up, preserving every clipping and note for 2 decades, proves that justice sometimes comes not from the system's swiftness, but from ordinary people's persistence. In a vast society like the US with thousands of missing persons cases, families, and communities, keeping victims' memories alive is key to pushing authorities to act. Moreover, Vincent Torres's image, a seemingly kind man, churchgoer, living among the community for over 20 years, yet a criminal, warns us against judging people by appearances alone. The lesson for today is never dismiss signs of harassment or let wrongdoing slide for lack of evidence at the time. From Elena's story, we learn that justice may come late, but with steadfast communities, families, and scientific advancements, the truth will eventually surface. This is a powerful reminder for every American. Stay patient. Don't silence your voice. And always believe the truth is worth waiting for. If you believe justice, even when late, deserves to be heard and valued, hit subscribe to join us in exploring more unsolved mysteries. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video as we continue seeking the truth behind stories buried by time.